Welcome to Hip Hop Now Podcast. If you're from the future, you know what to do. Get your ass out of here. Don't disrespect the legend. Hip hop is here to stay. Let's get right into the business. What up, y'all? I am your host, Vegas, and welcome to another Hip Hop Now Podcast bonus episode where we are ranking albums, a tier list, if you will, uh, of some of hip hop's greatest artists, groups, etc., etc. And today, if you haven't looked at the cover or the title and you just blindly said, I'm going to just press play, pause, you see that we are ranking the catalog of Smif-N-Wessun. And one of the reasons why I decided to do this, I did a review of their brand new album, Infinity, and I realized how attached I was to their debut and how much I didn't know about their catalog as a whole because of my feelings of nostalgia when it came to their debut. So this was a way for me to say, hey, let me take a deep dive down the rabbit hole and basically listen to all of their albums, collect my thoughts, and then rank them. So if you don't know any other Smif-N-Wessun albums besides maybe The Shining, maybe Cocoa Bees. What was the name of that, John? I'm forgetting already. What was the name of that? Oh, wait a minute. No, we can't do that. What was the name? Rude Awakening. Okay. I forgot that quick. Um, Maybe those are the only two you heard. And, nowadays you don't really know if Smif-N-Wessun are still releasing music or checking for music or whatever. So here is your guide. To do so, subscribe to the channel right here on YouTube, Hip Hop Now Pod. And more importantly, share with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Follow me on social media at Vegas World INC. Now, one thing I like to do, right? Let me just make these screens smaller so I can do what I'm doing at the same time I do this. Check that out. Boom, bam, right? Let's make it concise. Get right into it. You know what I'm saying? So I like to change the categories so that way they reflect the artist or the group. And Smif-N-Wessun is no different here. If this album is a classic to me, great. Nah, let's just go. Classic or great, right? We can't just say classic. Everybody don't have classics, right? Then it's going to come under this ranking. Tim's and Hood Chat. Well, first of all, let me just start real quick. This is going to be a very Brooklyn podcast. Let me just let you know right now. Yeah, got the fatigue Yankee drink. Can you see that? Fatigue up under there. I'm ready. Boot camp click. All right. So if it's a classic, Tim's and Hood Check. That's where the album will go. It's a great album, right? Maybe not a classic, but a great album. Recognize, all heads realize, recognize. You better recognize this. If it's a good album, stand strong, my brother. Stand strong. If it's sounding like, yeah, this one ain't it, could have been one or two joints on there is good. It's gonna be soundboy barrier, okay? But if it's just whack, wipe your mouth, okay? That's what that category is. Get it? Classic, great, good, okay, and trash. Let's get right into it. At the top, released in 1995, the album that most heads hold on to, The Shining, Tim's and Hood Check. Let's not even go there. Why? First of all, Smif-N-Wessun don't get mentioned enough when it comes to the back and forth rhyming together. Like they've done that since 95 and continue to do that to this day. And people really only mention like, Styles and Jadakiss or even Benny and Conway, but we forgot about Smif-N-Wessun? Nah, this album is a perfect example. perfect example of the production of the boot camp click that people just can't let go. It's a certain sound. It wasn't all beat minus. It was mostly beat minus, especially with this album and Black Moon's debut. But there was a specific sound, a backpacker sound, which isn't a dirty word or a dirty phrase or moniker or whatever. It's just, it is what it is. It is what it was. And Smif-N-Wesson's first album is so excellent, from the vibes, the music, the back and forth, the bars, the memorable hooks, uh, remixes that came as a result of some of the songs, like Recognize in particular, the Recognize remix. Ooh, I think I love it better than the original, and the original is dope. I think it's just that because the recognized remix samples just the two of us, some people at that time was like, nah, but I think it fit Smif-N-Wessun like a glove. And also when they appeared on a remix to one of Mary J. Blige's records, I don't know if it was, I forget which song it was. It wasn't My Life, but it was off one of those, it was a remix to one of those records off of her My Life album. Smif-N-Wessun was it at that time, like straight up. Hold up real quick. I'm getting brother getting notes and stuff. So let's get into what happened next. So if you don't know, not too long after Smif-N-Wessun had success with this debut, was people were looking forward to what the follow-up would be. They were sent a cease and desist regarding their name. Now I know it says Smif-N-Wessun, but Smith-N-Wessun, the gun company, wasn't really trying to hear that. So the group Smif-N-Wessun became the Cocoa Brothers. And I'm not going to hold you. When I first heard that, I was like, nah. Nah, man. Smif-N-Wessun was it. You know what I'm saying? And it was metaphorical, right? Like one was Smith and one was Wesson. I mean, they're Tech and Steel. That's their names. But you get it? Tech and Steel? Come on, man. So I can't just change that to cocoa bread, okay? They wasn't cocoa bread, but there was Cocoa Brothers. Uh, but the album was called The Rude Awakening. I believe it was released in '98, so that was like 3 years removed from their debut. And I'm gonna go with Stand Strong. Back then in '98, a lot had happened since '95. Music had changed a lot, and the beat miners weren't overseeing the sound like they were in the early days of Duck Down Records and Boot Camp Click specifically. So the songs that came out of this were different, because the production was different. I remember hearing Black Trump, one of the songs off their album featuring Raekwon, and feeling like, yeah, this one's kind of dope. You know what I'm saying? Like it's not what I remember, but it doesn't have to be, because this song to me is a little dope. And especially the song, because I heard this on a mixtape first, One on One. If you haven't heard One on One by the Cocoa Brothers, that's Smif-N-Wessun, same guys. But if you haven't heard that record, that's quintessential Smif-N-Wessun. It's everything I said about the back and forth, the energy of those two together. The issue with the Cocoa Brothers album to me wasn't just it didn't sound like The Shining. It just felt like in the beginning of this album, there's a lot of strong records on here, right? And then it starts to taper off a little bit. And I think that's what I didn't really like about it. I didn't like the production on some of those songs. I didn't like some of the hooks. I didn't like some of the verses. It just felt like they kind of had lightning in a bottle with one record, and not with one record, with a particular sound. And this strayed so far from what was familiar. It just felt like this just was a different group, right? They got a different name, different producers, different sound. And one record, which I believe was supposed to be on this album that got people hyped, but didn't make the album because of the sample not being able to clear it, was Super Brooklyn. That was on mixtapes, and it used Super Mario Brothers, right? It used music and sounds and all that, and that record was crazy. And I was just thinking, like, yo, Cocoa Brothers or not, I want this album when it drops. Bars. But it didn't make the album. And so it just kind of fell off with a lot of people who loved The Shining so much, loved what Smif-N-Wessun represented. Shout out to Roy Ayers, even when you look at that, The Shining's cover, which is a cover that Roy Ayers had. Um, the Rude Awakening just wasn't enough. You know what I'm saying? There's definitely some all-time joints on there, but it just wasn't enough to satisfy fans like myself. Then in 2005, Smif-N-Wessun got the name back, and they had an album called Reloaded, and I'm not gonna hold you, Recognize. Probably the one album people forget. People forget about this joint. Smif-N-Wessun had the name back. They were back. This album is better than The Rude Awakening to me because the lyrics are more inspired. The beats to me fit more of Smif-N-Wesson's style. And especially in 2005, I think, well, let me take that back. I was going to say in 2005 is when it probably still people were doing, all I know is early 2000s, people were doing less samples because of probably the whole Swiss Beats thing and other things. Like it was just costly to do samples. So even though this album isn't perfect, it's one of those albums where, again, if you're like me, like, yo, they had The Shining and I ain't really rock with them since, you need to check out Smif-N-Wesson's Reloaded. It's dope. Then in 2007, 2 years later, they dropped an album, self-titled album, Smif-N-Wessun The Album. The cover is basically a almost like a Western cover, and I ain't gonna hold y'all. Wipe your math, okay? Wipe your math. Now, there's two things about this album, and one I can't really hold against, right? Let's just start with the first one. This album's whack. This album's whack. Not only for Smif-N-Wessun, this album is whack, but also, and this is where some people may rank it a little bit higher because of this, and I'm not even mad at it. Lyrically, especially the first, felt like the first 6 or 7 songs, Smif-N-Wessun as a group, Tech and Steeler, they were going through some things because the tone of this album is so sad that it takes to get to a record that features Joel Ortiz going off for you to feel like there's some life in this project. And when I say it's so sad, you feel like Smif-N-Wessun, like they dealt with a lot of death or people going to prison, or they were just reflecting on it, one or the other. So either in 2007, a lot of that had happened that affected them personally, or they were just personally reflecting on a lot of things that happened, but it didn't make for inspired music lyrically. It just doesn't sound, it's not good songs. Let me put it that way. Uh, the sentiments in what they were rapping about is not the problem. It's just that the execution and again, the expectations for someone like me, who's a Smif-N-Wessun fan, were not met. Like coming off of Reloaded in 2005 and 2 years later, this is the follow up. Like this wasn't good. You know what I'm saying? Uh, but again, you may just lock in with the subject matter and it's good enough. And I'll say this, I could see them not doing much back and forth because how you really do that when you're talking about brothers that passed away and stuff like that? You can, but the excitement for me with Smif-N-Wessun has always been their back and forth on the mic. So Smith-N-Wessun, the album just was not good, man. And even returning to it, like I didn't really hear it back then. I heard a couple of songs, but giving it a really good listen now, and especially after listening to the whole catalog, it is the weakest album in their catalog, hands down. But fear not, because 4 years later, in 2011, they got with the legendary Pete Rock, and all was good. Recognized. Smif-N-Wessun was back. Pete Rock's production was crazy. I will say this: it always feels different for me, right? Listening to this particular album, because Pete Rock's imprint is on it so much, not just musically by making the beats, but also literally his voice is all over the place on this record. And it almost doesn't feel like Smif-N-Wessun with Pete on the boards. It feels more like a collaboration, which it is. If you look at the album cover, I mean, it's called Monumental. It's statues of Tech and Steel, but also a statue of Pete Rock. So maybe that was the goal. The outcome was a very good album at the time, and something that felt like, yeah, Smith-N-Wessun is back, with Pete Rock, which is crazy. Um, One thing I wanted to say before I continue with the last four albums is, in my review of their recent album, or their current album, Infinity, I said, when did Smith-N-Wessun become like inspirational speakers? I got to take that back, because even though I may say, oh, this album was hot and Deshaun is this and that, Smith-N-Wessun have always kind of spoke to positivity and consciousness. They've also spoke to guns in the streets and stuff, but they've always erred on the side of caution in their lyrics. So I can't pretend like all they talked about was street stuff and gangster stuff and smoking weed. And now in the 2020s, they're talking about all this inspirational stuff. They kind of always done that on all these albums if you go back and listen. So I just wanted to point that out. Uh, Next up, 2 years later, Smif-N-Wessun released an album, reggae inspired album, Born and Raised. And when I saw that, I'm not going to hold you, I was like, I'm not listening to that, because that's not hip hop, right? Boy, was I a fool. This album's good. If you like reggae, you like this album. What I like about it most is Smif-N-Wessun aren't deciding we gonna sing reggae or whatever. And reggae and dancehall has always kind of been a part of their aesthetic since day one, that it sounds and it felt more natural to hear them rhyming over these beats, and they knew how to do it. I'll give you an example of two artists who did something similar that for me didn't really jive with me. One, remember when Snoop was saying he changed his name to Snoop Lion, and he did a reggae inspired album? Garbage. Okay? Straight garbage. This is better. Remember when Nas teamed up with, I think, Stephen Marley, and he did Distant Relatives? I won't say it's garbage, but I felt like Nas wasn't in the pocket on those types of beats, which weren't necessarily reggae. They were more like reggae, Afro beat kind of style beats. And I feel like he wasn't in the pocket enough for me to like the collaboration. This is better. You know why? Because they understand that music. They're linked to that music and the history and the people, and you can just go back to songs like Soundboy Burial on their debut album. They know what they're doing with it. So Born and Raised, especially listening to it for the first time, I was surprised. Stand Strong. This is a good album, right? I want to go to Recognize, but there's two records where I was like, you messed up the flow. Um, Next up, in 2019, Smif-N-Wessun released The All, the arm, leg, and this album is Recognized. This is a good album. I had this as one of the best of the year in 2019. Was very close to cracking like my top five of the year. It's just Smif-N-Wessun over beats that fit their flow, their energy. They're on point with the back and forth again. It feels like Smif-N-Wessun is back again, right? Like they return not to the shining, right? Because truth be told, you look at the lineup of these albums. The Shining is the only album that sounds like that. There are more albums on this list that sound like The All and Reloaded and Monumental and some of the other stuff I'm going to mention than The Shining. So to me, my expectations at this point is more of what we hear from them today than what they did in 1995. And The All is a perfect example of bars and again, inspirational songs that show growth and stuff like that. So that was a great album around that time. Also in 2019, something that I didn't know dropped. And excuse me, quite honestly, I wasn't excited to hear it because typically when it comes to hip hop live albums, they never feel as good as the albums that are out that aren't live recorded somewhere in front of a crowd. They don't always sound like a good show because, and it's not everybody, but because MCs be cuffing the mic and they're really muffled and you can't really feel the beats in the same way, or they may not rhyme in a way that makes the record that you love sound good. You rather just listen to the original. So I was hesitant, but going back and listening to this joint called Champion Sound, let me get the whole title: Champion Sound, live from Prague. Um, I ain't gonna hold y'all. Tim's and Hood check. Now, some may say, "Word." You think it's a classic? I think it's slept on classic as far as their catalog. Of course, this is a show. So they're doing a lot of the hits and a lot of the songs come from their debut, The Shining. But it's Smif-N-Wesson's live performance that I like a lot. And it's with a band. That's what makes it extra dope. They got a DJ in there doing the wiggle wiggers, but they're performing with a band named Champion Sound. And nothing is left to be desired when it comes to the beats. The beats are a little bit different, but they still hit in the same ways. They still duplicated those sounds with the band in a way that's dope, that it still make you nod your head. Um, but what's the gem beyond them performing uh, live versions of From the Shining is all the other songs they did. Oh, this was a record. They did I Love You remix, Mary J. Blige. That was the song I was talking about. They performed that. They also performed, let me just really quick, And So, which was a song off a later Boot Camp album that was actually when people felt like, oh, Boot Camp's back. This is way later, like early 2000s. Also, obviously they perform off of other albums like Monumental with Pete Rock. They performed the Recognized remix, the one just the two of us, like I said. Um, but they also performed D&D Sound Clash, which I believe was on Afu Ra's album, which is dope. That's more like dancehall vibe, but crazy dope. One of their best songs. But they also performed Super Brooklyn. Remember the Super Mario sample joint that didn't make the Cocoa Brothers album that everybody liked on the mixtape and was like, damn, it's not on the album? They performed that on here. And what I love about listening to this live album, because I listened to it a couple times after that, I just thought it was dope, was not only their chemistry, but how they would set up the songs, right? And it's nothing that you haven't heard from another artist or whatever setting up songs before they go to them. It just felt so dope the way they did it. And a couple of times I'm not looking at the track listing. I'm just listening to what they're saying. They're like, yo, tell a brother you love him, blah, blah, blah. Tell him you love him, blah, blah. And then you hit like PNC off the Shining album. So it's stuff like that that to me makes that album Tim's and Hood Check. And lastly is their latest release, Infinity, released not that long ago. And I'm going to give this a stand strong, right? I feel like this album picks up where the all left off as far as tone and beats and all of that. Produced by Ninth Wonder and the Soul Council. But even though I feel like it's good, and who knows, may wind up being one of the better albums of the year, I felt like there was a little bit left to be desired, especially lyrically, especially now having gone back and listened to more recent stuff, and you feel like there's something missing from, that's on the all that's not there, and it's hard to articulate because I want to say it's lyrically this time. It's not, oh, the beats don't really match uh, Smif-N-Wesson's, flow. In some cases, that is absolutely true. But I feel like in a lot of ways, also lyrically, it's a little bit lackluster in comparison. But on its own, I think it's a good album. Stand strong. So there you have it. Looking at the layout of Smif-N-Wesson's catalog, there's really only one conclusion to draw from this research. It's the fact that Smif-N-Wessun basically has a really good catalog of music, right? When you look at all of them and you listen to all of them, and trust me, there are other artists where I'm like, man, yeah, 3 whack albums in a row. They have the majority of their albums are good to great, and then they have 2 special, in my opinion. Have you heard all of these Smif-N-Wessun albums, including Cocoa Brothers? What do you think? Do you see a different ranking? How do you rank these albums? Have you heard that live album? Leave your comments in the comment section below. Also included with this tier list and ranking of Smif-N-Wessun albums in the description is a Spotify playlist that I put together of some of the best music from their catalog. So check that out. Subscribe to the channel if you loved what you see here. If you want to see more, hit the like button if you like this specific episode. But more importantly, share it with people you know enjoy this kind of content. Follow me on social media anywhere at Vegas World INC. And remember, I'm not a critic, I'm a fan. Peace.